The feast of St. Stephen of Hungary reminds us of the power that one has in authority. He was crowned actually by the Pope at a distance, but he was proclaimed king by papal authority, and the year was an interesting year. It was 1001, and he was the first real king of Hungary, which made that country Christian from that time on, at least in culture. He had an amount of power which is explicable from the fact that he consecrated his kingdom to Our Blessed Lady. So she must have looked after him. He overcame what could have been rivalry from contenders, and he had an interesting policy. He obliged everyone to marry unless they went into the church, which meant that he had a large number of children growing up very quickly. But he forbade marriage with pagans. He wanted an entirely Christian country. He founded monasteries and sees. The biggest monastery is Pannonhalma, a big one there in Hungary to this day. Hungary is a bridge country. The style is rather like a country which is fairly close to it, Austria, with these onions over the churches. It's almost Eastern in style and great artwork. But they are Catholic, and they went to the Western Rite, which was not the case as you go further east again. Romania, which is close by and has a close link with Hungary, is mainly, but not entirely, of the Eastern Rite, and actually the Eastern Church, because they separated, as you know, in 1054. But it's interesting because there are parts of Romania where they speak Hungarian. I have a friend actually who's Romanian, and when she's at home, she prefers to go to the Eastern Rite, but under Rome, because you have Eastern Rite Catholics, rather than to the Western Rite, because the only priest who can celebrate in the Western Rite in her area does it entirely in Hungarian, whereas they will have a language which she understands in the Eastern Rite under Rome. All very difficult for us to understand. We only have one rite, essentially. But there, it's a bridge part of the world where East and West meet. Poland, for some reason, became Western Rite and has remained very, very Catholic to this day. Hungary, like Poland, suffered under the communist regime, but came through victorious. I want to zoom into what can actually happen when faith is undermined in a Christian country. They tolerated, under the communist regime, worship in the Russian or whatever Orthodox Church, partly because they were trying to use the church to get through to the people by the means they had with the link with the church, but that led to a certain contamination with regard to compromise. With the Catholics, it was more radical, and that would explain why in Lithuania, which suffered under the communist regime, but was Catholic, it was pretty awful, because the Catholics would not go along with the state at all, and they were very, very badly tortured quite often. I'll tell you a story. There was a nun who was being badly treated by the communist authorities, and she was being horribly treated there in prison. At a certain point, she was being exposed to radioactive stuff, and they knew it, and eventually her whole body was completely riddled with cancer. Somehow, years later, she found herself in Rome. She was allowed to get out, and John Paul II saw her. He went straight up to her and had an intuition of her story, and in his Eastern style, which is very warm, embraced her, and she felt something. And while embracing her, he was praying over her, and the body which was completely full of cancer, was strangely made whole, and not a trace was left. So that explains how, in a very short time, John Paul II was made St. John Paul II, because there's more to that man than meets the eye. He was the man for the epoch. Remember now, when he was made Pope, 1978, it was still full on, the communist thing. And he knew the music of communism. He had to be trained in secret. And when I was in Rome as a student with the Norbertines, we had houses there who were trying to be reopened in the Eastern Bloc. And I was with people who had suffered. A friend of mine, his name was Indrik, that's Henry, was from the Communist Bloc. And he had been made a Norbertine in secret. I think ordained also in secret. And that's how it was done. All hush, hush, and you had to keep it to yourself. But that's how they carried on. But with regard to what happened under the communist regime, it's very sad, because it actually devastated good countries. If you go now to Romania, which is close to Hungary and is doing worse than Hungary, they haven't got out of the terrible poverty. It's still pretty awful out there, and there's corruption also with regard to getting things done through bribery. I was talking to a priest working there in Bucharest, a Frenchman, and he was telling me how he had been present the other day, at the time he was talking, with the Archbishop of Bucharest at a meal. But at this meal, the Archbishop of Bucharest had wanted the poor as well. And they'd gone around and they'd got hold of the children who live underground. They were living, and I think it's still happening, in the sewers because they're big enough to hold a body. And they go around and they come out now and again into the daylight. But that's how they survive. It's a bit warmer down there, because it's very cold in Romania in the winter because there's hot water coming through. And that's how they survive. So these dirty children were brought into the Archbishop's house. And this priest who was admiring this performance was taken aback, almost to tears. Do you know why? These children who had nothing at all in this world and were physically not too clean did something which he would not have seen a spoilt child doing in the West. He was from France, remember. These children went up to the Archbishop and those around them, and with a huge beaming smile from ear to dirty ear, they handed them their food and were so glad to be serving and to be in the presence of somebody who was kind. And this took him aback, because he saw in these poor dirty children something which he hadn't seen in the polished children of the West. Gratitude! Gratitude! Children in the West are spoilt rotten. And the smaller the family is, the more they tend to be spoilt. So in a big family like yours, be grateful for what you have. And know too that you are far more blessed by having lots of siblings. Why? You have to think of everyone else and not yourself. One-child families are formally for disaster, humanly speaking. So let's ask for this grace to be grateful for the little things and to learn also the power of a touching smile. Irish eyes. The Lord has given you a nice smile. There is a goodness yet upon this land, not made of man, not made of humankind, and there are corners where old moments stand, in poise, where noises new did not yet bind the all to utter progress, where a little while had time to be all that it need but be, where but a smile could yet know how to glow, and merrily. Oh, little face, that paced not hard in haste to please, but yet the next that never came. But me alone, for naught, for utter waste of energy o'erspent, not in thy name shall I e'er know. Yet know I shall for days the meaning of a ray that idly strays. Two children holding hands. Why is it that the hand says more than all the words that fill the air, and that a child can hold another child with links so small that will yet bond two lives hence, where once smiled the sun of rising warmth? And why do we, when all is said and done, do nothing more than hold a being by these paws that see, 'neath wrinkled skin, the soul that learned this law? For there is in a touch much hiddenness of understanding grasped, and clasped limbs are bridges whereon pass in gentleness the moving things that memory ne'er dims. For we are said, when all our meanings stand within the grasp of but a clasping hand.
Dan di stal